What's going on, everybody? You're listening to the Point2Point NHL Recap Show. I'm Pascal Pryor, joined by Mark Haverlack. We got a fair bit to cover today. We're going to cover a few teams and sort of surprising starts that they're having. We got some more PWHL action that's going on here before the start of the season. Before we get into all of that, though, Mark, how are you doing, man?
Dude, doing not too bad. Was a pretty good weekend at work. I felt like for the most part. I don't know about you. According to like the Habs, I think we're going to talk about them today. Just been fucking brutal, dude. You must be pumped though, dude. You're headed to Montreal for the Flames Habs. I'm a little bit jealous.
Hell
That's
yeah.
pretty interesting to see. How are you doing? And I'm sure you're excited for this trip.
I'm doing good, man. I'm absolutely pumped. I'm going to the Bell Center for the Montreal versus Flames game tomorrow. I'm driving down tomorrow with my dad, but dude, I'm looking forward to that because Vladar started on Sunday, so that means Dustin Wolf's probably gonna be starting tomorrow night, right? So like, I'll
Yeah.
get to watch Wolf, and then also I'm honestly looking pretty forward to watching Lane Hudson. Like, yeah, he's not on my team, but watching Lane Hudson on the TV, just watching how smooth he's skating and stuff is already like really satisfying to watch. So watching him like up close and in person and being able to like watch him when he's on the ice, where when it would be on a broadcast, like the camera wouldn't be on him, like being able to watch him
Yeah.
sort of behind the scenes almost, along with watching Dustin Wolf and then sort of how smoothly Wolf sort of moves around the crease and his positioning. Dude, it's gonna be like some softcore porn watching that shit at the Bell Center. But
You're gonna be
I'm
hearing
looking,
you're gonna be hearing like the oohs and ahs a lot when Hudson tries his little dangles. I don't know if you've been hearing that, if you've watched any of the Habs games,
oh
but
dude,
they kind of like over exaggerated a little bit, to be honest. My other suggestion for you, since you've never been to the Bell Center, if you can and you're interested, I would say try to get there for warm up if you can. Warm up's pretty sick there at the Bell Center. Definitely something that I'd say if anyone who goes there should experience for sure. So I would definitely go and check that out, man, if you could.
Dude,
Mhm.
I always go for warm-ups, man. Like, I think if you're paying whatever you like the $150 you're paying for tickets, like you got to go for the full experience. If that means getting there for warm-ups, watching the players warm up, like that's one of my favorite parts, dude, of going to
Dude,
the game
and
is going
they
for
obviously don't really
warm-ups.
show it on TV, right? Unless you're watching like Sportsnet and they got a pregame. But I don't know if you realized, I'm probably gonna watch it tonight after this. Prime shows the warm up, on Monday night.
Yeah,
They show
yeah,
the
I know a
full
lot of
warm up
people are
with like
talking about that.
no audio besides like just the nat sound coming through the broadcast, which is really cool, I think, too. So definitely an advantage of going to the game, right? So
So, before we get into the sort of news and teams we're going to talk about for today, I think we got to make a little wager here on this game tomorrow night. Yeah, like, are you down for that?
I'm sure,
So, so
I'm down.
here's my proposition: if the Flames win,
Okay.
you have to wear a Flames jersey for the entire next podcast. And
Okay.
if Montreal wins, I have to wear a Montreal jersey for the whole.
I'd be down to do that for
I
sure.
think that's a nice, friendly little wager. All right, we'll shake on it, even though we're not in person. We'll
Sounds
shake on
good.
it next time I see you. Let's get into the first team that we're going to talk about today. It's the Minnesota Wild. They're off to a sort of surprising start here. They currently sit second in the Central Division with 18 points and they have an 8-1-2 record. Mark, do you think this is like for sure a playoff team now, based off what you've seen so far this season?
Dude, I fucking said these guys are coming in last in this division. I wasn't really that convinced to start the season, but like, man, they actually look really good. I was watching them against the Leafs yesterday. They seem like a really solid team. I think that they probably put themselves in such a good situation that even if they do fall off a bit, they probably will end up making the playoffs. To be honest with you, I think this start's kind of too good to kind of, unless you lose like 10 in a row, man. I feel like they put themselves in such a good situation that they're probably going to end up making the playoffs. Gustafson kind of looks like the way he did a couple of years ago when he had like that like 935 save percentage. Last year was kind of a little bit off for him, I felt, but I mean, he's playing really well. They're getting contributions from a lot of guys. Kaprizov, obviously, you can make the argument that he'd win the Hart Trophy if the season ended right now, right? But Marco Rossi's looking really good back there. Brock Faber's been kind of continuing what he was doing from last season. He's not really showing any flaws in his game. But they have a pretty solid all-around team. Their defense are pretty good as well. Spurgeon hasn't really been playing a whole lot. That's the one thing you would hope if you're a Wild fan. He can get back as well, take a little bit of the load off of Brock Faber. But I mean, they got a pretty solid team. They've got some young guys there too, in Ogren and Husnudinov, that I think are making impacts. And they kind of need that, to be honest, man, because with them dealing with that $14 million cap with Parise and Suter, it's like you need guys that are not making a lot of money to come in here and contribute, right? And that's a good thing that Marco Rossi's doing. He's going to be off his ELC this year, but um, it's going to be a lot better for the Wild next year for sure when they don't have to deal with this stupid cap hit of the buyouts. But I think this team can make the playoffs, man, for sure. I think they're looking really solid to start the year.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think this team's a cup contender. I still think they're a fair bit away from that, but I'm all with you that this is like almost a lock to be a playoff team based off how they've started the season. Like they're getting the goaltending. Their top guys are playing really well. Like as you mentioned, Kaprizov, he's off to a really good start, man. You got Matt Boldy. He's going to be at a point per game this year. Hopefully he can stay healthy because there has been a bit of health issues in the past with him. But for me, the two players that are really sort of making a difference between this team being like more of a middle pack team to a playoff team, it's Matt Zuccarello and Marco Rossi, right? Like Matt Zuccarello, he's been off to a really good start so far this season. He's on pace for a point per game season this year, which is really good. And then Marco Rossi currently has 10 points through 11 games, so he's just off that point per game pace. But like when Minnesota drafted him, they sort of drafted him, I think, with the expectations that this guy was going to be a top six forward, even debatably like a first line center type of player, right? And he took a bit more time to develop and get to the NHL. But now that he's in the NHL and coming off his last year on his ELC, like he's performing really well here to start off this season. And if he can keep this up, right, like that just adds sort of a secondary layer of scoring players for Minnesota. Because when you talk about them, you sort of talk about their big guys, which is like Kaprizov, Boldy, Faber on the back end. You can throw Spurgeon in there. But then I think the issue for them really in the past couple of years has been like, where's their secondary scorers? And now when you have Zuccarello and Rossi playing how they're playing, it's sort of adding that to your secondary scores, which I think is really leading to the success they've had so far early on in the season. The only thing with them though is the goaltending, right? Like we talk about how good Gustafsson has been so far this season. Like, is he really going to be able to keep up with how good he's been? Like, do I think he's going to end the season with a 924 save percentage and a 212 goals against? Like, honestly, probably not. Those stats are probably going to dip down a bit, but even when they dip down, like it's still going to be good enough for them to be a playoff team. So I'm liking this team from what I'm seeing so far. The only thing that I want to ask you though is, do you think Rossi can keep this up for a full 82 games? Like, do you think he'll sort of dip down at some point? Maybe finish the season off as more of like a 50 to 65 point score?
So I think he probably is more in that range, the 50 to 65, to be honest, for a full season. But I think that's something that you wanna. I think that's okay, basically.
Yeah.
I think that it would be nice if he can take that another step next year. I think the thing with him, man, is that I was very high on him when he was drafted. He was also dealing with that like back issue. I don't know if you remember. He got COVID and then he was like dealing with like long-term symptoms. And he basically had like issues with his back and he had to sit out like almost an entire year, I believe. I
Yeah.
think it was more with him that he looked pretty solid in the NHL. It's just like if you look at his stat line, it was pretty bad. Like he just really wasn't putting up good numbers at all, but he looked like a pretty decent player. So I think it's good that he's been taking that next step so far this year and he's actually putting up solid numbers. Man, how nice would it be though if this team had like a legit number one center? To be honest, I really like Joel Eriksson Ek as well. I think he's a super solid two-way center who's putting up pretty decent numbers. Like, man, he was shadowing Matthews like basically the whole game yesterday. He's a really solid two-way guy, right? But I think if you had a guy who's putting up like 90 points down the middle, like that would be like ideal for Minnesota, probably something they've lacked. Man, who's to say that Rossi couldn't get there in the next couple of years, though? Like, if he
Yeah.
continues, you know what I mean? Like, dude, he's playing with Kaprizov, man. Like, you know what I mean? So, Kaprizov looks awesome as well, obviously, right? You mentioned Matt Boldy. He was a guy I didn't really bring up. He's looking pretty good. Even in net, though, like you were talking about with Gustafsson, like, my thing is that they got Fleury, who, I mean, he can play good. He's obviously shown at times the last couple of years he hasn't been good, but man, it's like even if there's a time where Gustafsson struggles, like Dude, bring up Wallstead. Give him a couple games. Like he's kind of their guy of the future. You know what I mean? So give him a shot. They extended him for $2.2 million starting next year. Like the expectation is that he's going to play right after Fleury. So it's like even if those two guys are struggling, bring him up. Give him a couple starts. See what happens. You know what I mean? So I think Minnesota's in a pretty good spot right now.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. And it's funny you mentioned Wallstead because the other thing I sort of wanted to say about this team is like when you look at what they're doing now with the 14 mil in dead cap, like wait until next season when this team doesn't have that dead cap, right? And they can
Oh,
go
I
and
know,
spend
man.
money
I
because
think they're going
maybe
to be super active this offseason.
super active. And the other thing too is they still got a decent prospect pool too, right?
Oh,
Like
dude, I would say it's one of the better prospect pools in the like. Honestly, if I broke down every prospect pool, I would personally be surprised if they weren't in the top 10. To be quite honest with you, and it's like, dude, like, is Zeev Booyah making this freaking team? Like, dude, is he stepping in like in the playoffs this year?
yeah,
Like, maybe, you know what I mean? So then you get that money freed up as well, like you said. So. I don't know. I think they're in a pretty good spot moving forward. It sucks Billy G's had to deal with this buyout, but it was kind of something he had to do. Like imagine Parise and Suter were still on this team for $7.5 million each, right? Like
it
it's
would.
like all everyone will be talking about is, oh, you should buy him out. You know what I mean? Like why haven't they been bought out, right? So I feel like it was the right decision they make. They just got to deal with this stupid cap hit, right? But yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a fun team watching for the next few years. Let's move out to the Metro Division, and there's sort of a surprising team there. It's the Washington Capitals. They're currently third in the Metro with 16 points and an 8-3 record. They made the playoffs last year. Do we see them in the playoffs again? Like, I think it's looking pretty positive for them, to be honest. But what are you thinking, Mark?
Man, honestly, I don't really see them continuing this that much, to be honest. Like, I know it's kind of like they made the playoffs and surprised us, and they're starting like this and surprised us, but I don't know, man. Like, to be honest, like their goaltending hasn't really been that great. They've been scoring a lot of goals, which is good, but I'm not convinced it's that sustainable. I think at best they're going to be a wild card team, to be honest. I don't really see them being top three, but. Man, I could just be doubting them and can be totally wrong, but I'm not really that convinced. I will say though, like I think Ovi's looking pretty solid. Like I do see him breaking the record this year. I think he's put himself into such a solid spot so far that I think that he's probably gonna end up getting like over 40. Like I think that he needs what four? I think he would need 43 from the start of the year to break it.
Yeah,
Um,
so he needs 34 more to tie the record. He has 7 goals currently through 11 games. He's on pace. He's on pace for 52 right now, right? He's on pace for
Yeah,
52.
I don't know if he's gonna have 50, but I see him like breaking the record in the last like 10 games of the season.
Yeah, I
That
could I
that's
could
enough.
for sure see it happening this year where he breaks a record. Like 34 goals to tie the how sick would it be though if he got 34 more and then like he tied it last game of the season he ties it and then going into the next season like first game of the year he breaks it. Like how sick would that be if he did that?
Yeah, it's all people would talk about all summer, to be honest. I feel like ideally it'd probably just be better if he broke it this year, if he got that close, man. You know what I mean? But I
The
mean,
talk
it would be pretty like I think it would be cool, dude, if like he broke it on the last game of the year and like his goal or one or like a goal in that like it was contributing to them like clinching a playoff spot.
that honestly, okay, that
Like
that
kind of
trumps
like
what I said.
last year, you know what I mean? Like where they made on the last day of the season. Like I feel like imagine him scoring like the OT winner that like sends him to the playoffs that also breaks the record. Like I think that'd be like one of the coolest things ever, man.
But yeah, like with them making the playoffs, it's going to be tough for them, right? Because 1, 2, 3 in that division is pretty stacked with the Rangers, the Hurricanes, and the Devils, and then that means they have to make it in as a wild card spot. And it is possible to make it in for them, like making it in through the wild card. But the only thing is, like the Atlantic Division this year is so stacked. It's like it might be hard to jump one of those teams in the Atlantic and get in if you're
Yeah,
Washington. But
I'm not trying to be like negative about them, and I do think they have a very impressive start here. Like one guy that I think's been so good has been Dylan Strome, dude. Like he's looked freaking awesome so far this year. I still can't believe Chicago just let him go as an unrestricted free agent, and he was an RFA. They just decided not to qualify him. You know what I mean? Um, I, but I just think that it's like also the strength of the top of the division. I think it's like Carolina, New Jersey, and the Rangers. I just think over the rest of the season, like what are we talking, like 70 more games? I just see them finishing higher, to be honest. And it's not like any of those teams are off to poor starts where it's like I don't see them having enough to come back, and you know what I mean? So it's like I think the Caps are either a wild card team or they're not making the playoffs. But obviously they put themselves in a really solid situation to start the year. The Atlantic's really tight right now, though, right? Like a lot
Yeah.
of the teams, like the Caps would be up there in the Atlantic. I think they might even would be on top of the Atlantic. You know what I mean? But I just think that it's going to be tough for them to make the playoffs. I'd like you said, the Atlantic is tough with five teams possibly making it, and I just don't see them beating out the Rangers, Canes, or the Devils for a top three spot in the Metro.
Well, while you're talking about the Atlantic, let's move on to the bottom of the Atlantic standings where your Montreal Canadiens sit. Over the offseason, they brought in some players, right? They were sort of hoping the team would take a step, not necessarily meaning they were going to make the playoffs, but a lot of people were hoping that we would see these younger players really start to grow and them playing some more meaningful games. So far early into the season, are you disappointed so far from what you're seeing?
Yeah, 100%, man. Like I would say like in the last over the last couple of years, just like knowingly being in a rebuild, this has probably been some of the most unenjoyable hockey I've watched, to be quite honest with you. Obviously, like they haven't done well the last couple of years, coming in dead last and then getting the fifth overall pick twice in a row. But the one thing I will say about the Canadians, and it's one thing that I like and enjoy watching about them, is that they compete all the time. They don't really get blown out a lot by teams. I don't know. You can go back and look at a bunch of box scores, but they don't really get blown out a lot. So it's one thing that I like watching. You know what I mean? They're kind of in every game, even if you have those thoughts in the game where they're down by two and it's like, fuck, I don't really see them coming back against like the Rangers or something. You know what I mean? Like, but I mean, they're there. You know what I mean? But lately, it hasn't been the case, man. I haven't really been seeing the compete defensively. I think that the goalies are getting hung out to dry quite a bit. And I think it does come from the forwards as well. I think it's definitely something that they're going to have to change moving forward, because it's kind of like an identity thing. I can't really say I'm that surprised that it's happening though, with how many young guys are on defense. Um, there has been a couple bright spots, obviously, like Hudson. It's like the offense has been great, but the defense hasn't been, kind of what I talked about in accordance to like the growing pains with it. You know what I mean? The one bright spot, dude, like, dude, Caulfield's been awesome, man.
He's been amazing.
Like he's been so good. And it's like Suzuki even has more points than him, but like I would 100% say that Caulfield's been the best forward. I don't think Suzuki or even Slavkovsky have like been close to like what I think they can be. Like the fact that Suzuki's over a point per game and Slav's like just under, like it to me is like insane. Like I think they've been playing much worse than their stats show, to be honest with you. Caulfield is just like, he doesn't really put up a lot of assists usually, so that's why he's got like 11 points, 10 of them are goals. But man, I am freaking praying that he can hit 50 this year. I think at this point he's put himself in such a good spot that if he stays healthy, he's hitting 40.
I think he
Um,
hits 40 without a doubt at this point.
but a lot of guys, I think, are just kind of not really playing that well, to be quite honest with you, up front and on defense. Like New Hook, been super freaking underwhelming,
Yeah.
to be quite honest with you. Kirby Doc's been underwhelming. I'm not really that concerned about it though, considering like he's coming off a huge injury. You know what I mean? And there has been points in these first 12 games where he's looked himself, but it just hasn't really been that consistent. I really like Jake Evans as a fourth line center. I think that that's a guy they can potentially sell off at the deadline if they decide to not re-sign him this year. But besides that, it's just a bunch of guys not really playing too well, to be honest. And the one thing that I will say that gives me hope is that Gooley's been out the past couple weeks, and that's when our defensive kind of structure has been going downhill. So I think if you get him back, he's a guy who's playing over 20 minutes a night on that first pair, right? So hopefully that'll help out. But man, I like I said from the beginning of the year, I thought wild card was just like still it's too fast. It's too quick,
Yeah.
man. It's too much. It's not. It's just not happening, man. Even if
I think
Line started the team with the team at the beginning of the year, it's like I don't know. I still think there's like a couple years still before we're talking about that.
I do agree with you that like wild card this season would have been too quick for them, but I also think there's an in between though. Like right now, you guys are on pace, right, for another top five pick, where it's maybe you guys are in the wild card, but if you guys are somewhere in between being that like being in the wild card and being a bottom five team in the NHL, if you guys are somewhere in between there, I think that's a bit better because then at least like the players are. That means like some of these younger players are growing, right, and
For,
starting to.
to be fair though, again, like if it ended up being like the fifth overall pick again, it's just like I would be like, yeah, progression would suck, like most likely from some of these guys, but it would also be like, this is kind of a loaded draft, dude. Like, it's
It
not really
is.
like I wouldn't mind it. You know what I
It is
mean?
a.
So
It
it
is a
would be
loaded.
crazy. Sorry. The one thing I just want to say is like, it would be kind of crazy if like Caulfield's hitting 50 goals and like we're picking top five again. Like that's where I would be like, I wouldn't be that concerned because it's like, dude, he's progressing. Like, you know what I mean? Like we're getting a legit sniper here, but I guess I'd prefer not to be picking top five again.
That's the thing I'm sort of like feeling. Like I'm not watching this team as much as you are, of course, but like looking sort of at the point totals here, and it's like Suzuki, like Caulfield, even Slavkovsky. It feels like so like those guys are progressing a little bit, but then when you sort of look at like the secondary role players, like it feels like they're not progressing, right? Like you mentioned Newhook and how he's not off to a great start. You mentioned Doc. Doc, I agree with you that he doesn't worry as much because he's coming off like the guy hasn't played hockey in a year up until now, right? So it's like it's gonna take him some more time to get up to game speed compared to some of these other players. But then it's like Josh Anderson, right? Like you guys brought him in from Columbus and he's still not doing that much. Christian Dvorak, right? Like you sort of want to see him do a bit more. For me, it just really feels like some of these players lower in your lineup, they're just not really
Yeah, that's
progressing or not really impacting the games that much.
yeah, and that's the thing that it that gives me more hope for the future. It's where it's like, all right, well, most of the top six is kind of there. Like it's just
Yeah,
like you got to figure out your depth and like you got to figure out how to play defense, and then obviously, ideally, like getting a couple more top six forwards in there would be, I guess, I like ideal because it's like yeah, my hope down the road is Kirby Dach can be a really solid second line center, where you're looking at him on a cup contender and being like, he's a really good 2C, right? But it's not really it. That's kind of a concern right now, where it's like I'm not really seeing that, right?
yeah,
I think too, like with Demidov, it's like I feel like kind of his floor is top six forward. And like his ceiling is kind of like probably like a superstar, you know what I mean? So adding him to the lineup, whether that's as early as next year, is going to be really good for this team as well. So it's like I'm not really that concerned about the rebuild, even to start that we're starting the season like slow. It's like there's going to be growing pains, man. Like these guys are young players. Like they're not just going to step in and be really great every single night. You know what I mean? But it's like I also expect them to be a lot more consistent and like hardworking than they are right now, right? Because that's been kind of like the identity of this team is that like it doesn't even really matter that, like that you're not skilled. It's like if you work hard, dude, like you're gonna be in every single game. Like you think this team got to the Stanley Cup Finals 4 years ago because they were really skilled and talented? Like no, like they sure they relied on a great goaltender to help them out, but they also played really good team defense and kind of grinded to get their goals. You know what I mean? And it's like yeah, sure, we got a great sniper and a great two-way forward in Suzuki and a good power forward in Slavkovsky, but it's like these guys aren't like full superstars that are taking over every single game, like right. So
yeah.
I think the identity of this team just needs to kind of get back to where it was and working hard. And it's like, dude, I'm not expecting like I'm not pissed off here because this team's not playing well and making the playoffs. It's that they're not working hard. They're getting blown out, and it's just like it's embarrassing to watch, dude. Like you think I sat here last week and was happy that we let in 8 goals against Seattle? Like you know what I mean? Like it was embarrassing, dude. You know what I mean? And it's like I don't really want to watch that kind of hockey anymore.
Yeah, I think it would help you guys if you still got a decent pick, but you saw some progression from these younger guys. Overall though, like you guys still got a bright future ahead of you guys, right? Like, and I'm not worried about this team at all in the future. It's more just let's see them start to play some better hockey here going forward this season. Let's move on though to some stories that happened over the last few days since we last recorded. First one here is Valeri Nichushkin from the Colorado Avalanche has now been cleared to begin practicing with the team. He still remains in stage 3 of the NHLPA player assistance program and is ineligible to play games. His suspension is slated to last until at least mid-November, and then he should be able to return to the team and start playing some games. What do you think, though, it's going to do for Colorado getting him back?
Oh, dude, I think that's going to be massive, man. They've obviously been super inconsistent to start the year. A lot of it at the beginning was just poor goaltending. They've been getting some more stable goaltending recently with Annunen stepping in. But I think up front too, like think of how injured this team is right now. Lehkonen is just coming back. He just got activated, I think, yesterday. That's going to be a huge add for them too. But when you're talking about Landeskog's still out. Wood's out. Colton's out. Dude, Ross Colton was awesome to start the year. I would have loved to see him continue to be healthy and see what he would have done. I think he had 8 or 9 goals in the first 11 or 12 games. So I think adding a guy like Nichushkin coming back is going to be huge if he can kind of find his groove right away. Obviously, he's been about a point per game the past couple of years, right? While being a super responsible two-way player and being almost like a power forward-ish type. You know what I mean? I think that Nichushkin at his best is a super underrated player in this league, man.
Yeah.
It just depends. Where's he at mentally? Where's he at physically as well? Obviously he's been skating, but it's not game action recently, right? So even if we're getting honestly, man, even if you're getting 60% of what Nichushkin can be, I think it's going to be a positive upgrade for this team with just how injured they are. But I think if you're getting Nichushkin almost at his best, it's just going to be a huge plus, right? I think even Randon's been kind of struggling lately, man. I don't know if you saw he's got 1 goal in his last 10 or 11 games. So I think that this is all positives for Colorado, but you just got to hope that whatever's been going on with him, he's kind of figured it out. And we're just talking about him playing hockey going forward. You know what I mean? Because think about Nichushkin at his best and you're getting this guy for just over $6 million. Dude, he'd be worth that in a heartbeat. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
So I hope he can continue to stay healthy because I really like watching him, man.
Yeah, of course, with stuff like this, you always want to make sure the players in the right headspace and they're doing fine. And if he's starting to be allowed to practice with the team, you would think that stuff is progressing and he is starting to do better, right? So that is good to hear. And for Colorado, it is going to be a massive boost to get him back in the lineup. As you mentioned, the way he plays and sort of how injured Colorado is right now, they really need him back in the lineup. But the other thing too is the way he plays. He plays a really energizing game, right? He's a big body, he hits guys. So for Colorado, who sort of got off to the slow start and are looking to sort of catch up and get back into a wild card, if not top 3 spot in the division, maybe getting him back in the lineup is going to be the spark they needed, right? Because if I'm Nate Dogg or some other players in the lineup and Nichushkin comes back and he's throwing around big hits, scoring big goals, that would motivate me, right? So hopefully,
Dude, I think just getting him and Lehkonen being grindy guys is gonna help those top guys so much, man.
Oh yeah, it's for sure gonna be a big boost to this team. Let's move out to the Atlantic Division. Toronto Maple Leafs, they made a little move this past week. They sent away Timothy Liljegren to the San Jose Sharks, and in return, they received Matt Benning, a 2025 third-round pick, and a 2026 sixth-round pick. What are your thoughts on this trade?
I think it makes sense for both teams. I think Liljegren really wasn't getting Craig Berube's trust too much. Only playing in 1 game this year. I do think he's a pretty solid defenseman, but I think he has struggled to show that He's been like a solid, consistent top four guy that the Leafs could rely upon on the right side. And I think just with the cap hit at $3 million, like it's like if he's going to be sitting in the press box, like I don't want to say every night, but well, basically it was every night to start the year. It doesn't really make sense to have him on the roster. I guess it does make sense for the Leafs. I would have thought they could have got a second, or at least like a conditional second. Um, but I think Benning's solid. Like he's a solid kind of 6'7" guy. He's decently physical, like plays defense, like kind of what the Leafs would need. Not really too sure if they're going to end up keeping him long term. I know with guys coming back, the Leafs are going to either have to trade someone else or put someone on waivers, and then they still already have a lot of D. But I think getting rid of him made sense. And for San Jose, this makes total sense, dude. Like you're bringing in a guy who could play, let's say, in their top four right hand. You know what I mean? Who knows? Like maybe he turns into a really solid player, a guy that San Jose kind of uses down the road here. Their D core is not like old by any means, but they've got some older guys like with Vlasic and stuff, CC, right? So I think bringing him in is a solid move, man, to be quite honest with you, for the Sharks, right? Like they got the cap space. You only got him for this year and next, even if he doesn't work out and he is kind of what he's shown in Toronto, or maybe not even as good. Like you don't really have to commit to him, right? And if he ends up playing really solid, like playing a lot of minutes, like you think he could be a top four defenseman for you through this rebuild and beyond, then you can sign him, right? So I think this move kind of makes sense for both teams, to be quite honest with you. But I think if the only thing I would have really tried harder to get at least like a second or conditional second, just considering like Sandin got you first like a year and a half ago. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like I don't really think those guys are that far off each other, to be quite. I know they play different styles, but it's like they're similar age, they're first round picks, like you know what I mean? So I think that would be my only knock here.
Yeah, see, I like this trade for all the parties involved. Like for the Leafs, you're getting picks back for a guy that was not in this team's plans whatsoever, right? Like as you mentioned, he only played one game. You can't have $3.5 million sitting in the press box, right? Like that's not feasible if you want to be a cup contending team to have that amount of salary sitting in the press box every night. And then the other thing is like they're going to be getting some players coming back here pretty soon. They got to free up roster spots. I really think Matt Benning's probably going to get flipped here. Flipped or they're going to do something here with him.
With Hawk and Paw coming back, I think probably, to be honest. Like
Yeah,
I don't really think there's much room for him with Benning.
they got to do something here to free up some roster spots, but a third round pick, like yeah, they could have gone a second, but at the end of the day, I think they were really just trying to free up this cap space and get these roster spots, and that's sort of what they did here. And then for San Jose and also for Liljegren, like San Jose, you're getting a player who's he's still only 25 years old, right? And he was a first round pick, so you're getting a guy who could still sort of come out here and break out and become, maybe not become the player we thought he was going to be when he got drafted, but if he can be a solid top four guy, right? Like San Jose is going to be laughing at this. Like look what they did with Jake Wallman and how Jake Wallman's doing right now for San Jose after they got him from Detroit, right? Like if they can do something like that here with Liljegren, I think they'll be completely happy. And then for Liljegren's perspective, like you weren't getting a shot in Toronto. You sort of went through two coaches and two general managers that you weren't, I don't want to say he wasn't in their good books, but he didn't really win them over, right? Like, so it's like your time in Toronto had clearly come to an end. Now he's going to a team in San Jose who, like, he's going to get a shot in the top four playing every night. He's probably going to get power play time as well, right? Like, he's going to get a lot of opportunity in San Jose, I think. So for all three parties here, I think it's really sort of working out well. Let's move on to the PWHL, though. They had some big news coming from them over the past week. The first overall pick in the 2024 PWHL draft, Sarah Fillier, has signed a one-year deal with the New York Sirens, so she's locked up for her first year in the PWHL. The only thing, though, that's really sort of been blowing up here after this news came out was the PWHL contract situation. So basically with her, she signed the one-year deal, New York was really pushing for her to sign a 3-year deal, but she basically just kept on turning it down, kept on turning it down. She said she would only sign a 1-year deal. And finally, New York sort of got, I don't want to say strong armed into it, but they had to sign her to the 1-year deal. And since the PWHL, they don't have RFA, after this 1-year deal is done, she's going to hit unrestricted free agency and she'll be able to sign anywhere she wants. Mark, is this going to be a major issue for the PWHL going forward? And if so, like, what would you sort of propose to fix this?
I think it's definitely an issue. Like it's like excuse me, I'm not in the sense where
I'm really blaming her for doing it because like it's well within her right to do that. It obviously she's from Georgetown, right? So
Yeah.
depending, I think she'll probably end up like signing with Toronto next year, being pretty close to home. But I think it's definitely going to be an issue going forward because it's like, why won't other first overall picks like kind of push to do the same thing if they want to do that, right? I think there should be like a thing where it's like they kind of have your rights for like, I would say, I think 3 years is fair, to be honest. And after that, it's like if you sign another contract after that, you become an unrestricted free agent. Or, I mean, like that team could have their right to trade you within those first 3 years too, right? So that'd be the only way I guess you could move. But I think it's definitely going to be an issue because it's going to suck for New York, right? They might have her, like she might step into the league, be awesome right away. And then it's like you think your team's going in the right direction and then they're not, right? Because you could potentially lose her after that 1 year. I think they're just going to have to try and do the best job they can to convince her to stay after this season, but it doesn't really seem like that's the case. You know what I mean? Maybe she's open to it, and maybe it's just like I literally don't know. I don't want to commit for 3 years if I don't have to, right? And I want to see where this team's at after 1 year. So. I don't know. I think that there definitely needs to be a change with it, to be honest, because not that every first overall pick would do it, but it's like, dude, even if like it's like every second year the first overall pick's doing it, like it kind of sucks.
Yeah, even if any like first round picks doing it, right? Like even if it's not the first overall pick, but it's like people that are going to make an impact in your lineup, right? Like, oh, you don't want that happening whatsoever if you're the team drafting, because then the thing is like over the next few years, like if a bunch of players start to do that after they get drafted, like the parity in the league is like there's not going to be much parity, right? Like some of these smaller markets or teams that are less desirable to play for are going to have a lot of issues sort of getting out from the bottom of the standings, especially if they're expanding at the rate. Like they're adding 2 teams that we talked about this last episode. They're adding 2 teams. So if like let's say if within the next 5 years they get to 12 to 14 teams, if they don't fix this contract issue, there might be teams that are just consistently in the bottom 4 where it's like completely unfair to them because they're getting these high draft picks, but they just keep on leaving after a year, right? So it's like, I'm with you. I think you add like you don't do an ELC, but you do a 3-year like RFA period where they can't sign with another team for 3 seasons. I think that sort of fixes the issue.
Yeah. Or even be all like off, quote unquote, offer sheeted. I think, to be honest, I think being with a team for 3 years is completely fair. I don't think it's too long of a time period where it's like you feel like you're super committed. And it's like also if you feel like it's not working within that ELC, you can also go to your team and ask for a trade. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's not like there's zero way to get out of the situation. And also, you have made a really good point about that with the teams and the expansion coming. And I think you could also look at it on the side of, yes, the teams that were proposed, we were talking about last week about expansion, I would say are not necessarily big hockey markets, but they're not like poor hockey markets. You know what I mean? Like, but also you can look at the side where, okay, if they don't change this rule and this league grows and grows, and say we're even talking about closer to 20 teams down the road, how could you convince a team like somewhere like Anaheim or LA where you're not getting a lot, maybe not a lot of players coming from there, and that maybe someone from Minnesota gets drafted first overall and they're like, well, I don't really want to go to LA. Like,
Yeah.
I want to stay in Minnesota. I want to go to Minnesota after a year or something. You know what I mean? So I think it would just be tougher to convince like smaller markets to like join the league if that's the case. And there's not a lot of talent coming from those areas. Not that there's not any talent, but it's like even in the NHL, it's like there's not a lot of players from Arizona or like LA. You know what I mean? There's more than there has been, but there's not a lot still, right? So I think it's like if you're trying to convince these smaller markets or like a place where it's not like great to play, you know what I mean? Like it might not be warm, like you know what I mean? Like we talk about Winnipeg, like not getting like being able to attract free agents in the NHL. It's like if Winnipeg gets a women's team, it's like if they get a first overall pick, it's like someone might want to leave after a year. You know what I mean? So I think for these other markets too that could get teams eventually, like this would have an effect on it.
Yeah, it's definitely gonna be an issue going forward, but like here's the thing about the PWHL. It's still really new, right? Like they've only played one season. This stuff, like it's smart people that are running the PWHL, right? Like it's not me and you running the PWHL. Like these people that are running the PWHL, they know what they're doing. They're gonna, like, as the years go on, as the season goes on, as they grow the business and as they grow the league, like all this stuff and is gonna get, I don't want to say fixed, but it's all going to get set the way they like fully want to be set, right? So
Right.
I don't think there's too many issues that this is going to keep on happening over the next like 5 years or so, because I think they'll do something about it pretty quick here, especially if she does turn out to leave at the end of the season, right? Because then it will be an even bigger story than it already is. But
the thing is, dude, is like she seems like she's gonna be a hell of a player, dude. So
yeah,
it's like if she's one of the top players in the league consistently and she does leave to go to like Toronto or whatever, like I think it's gonna bring a lot more of attention to it, right? That like it's like you could potentially get this generational talent, but well, they can leave you in a year. And it's like every player can strap the team where it's like, well, I'm not signing unless it's a 1 year deal. And what the hell is the team supposed to do about it, right?
yeah, you can't do anything at that point.
Yeah.
Overall, though, I'm still looking forward to the start of their season. We'll be back next week. Unfortunately, one of us is going to be pretty upset wearing a jersey we really dislike. So you'll definitely want to stay tuned next week and sort of see that. But overall, thanks for tuning in to this week's episode, everybody.